Okay, so just wanted to welcome everyone this evening. My name's Andrew Notter. I'm a Vice Chair for the British Chamber of Commerce, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to the first cider tasting session that we've actually produced. And I'm very happy that Gabe Cook is able to join us, and he will be able to take us through a number of tastings over the next hour and a half. And we have Adi, who's the Vice President of Ramborn Cider, who's also going to produce, but also give us an insight into what Ramborn is doing at the moment, and give us an overview, especially with their recent B Corp status that they've recently had, as you may have read in the press. And he will happily give an overview about what that means for the business Luxembourg and the cider that you're going to be drinking. So I hope you have everything in the fridge. It's cold. It's going to be a very, very fun event. We've got a few ciders to get through, so try not to drink all of them at once. Please enjoy. It's an interactive session, so I will ask everyone to keep it on mute for the moment. And once Gabe starts talking, he will ask for questions and discussions, so please unmute that. We have the chat box as well, so if there's any points you want to make, any comments, please do type in the chat box, and I'm sure we can get back to you with any answers or questions that you want to be discussed throughout the point. So that's pretty much it from me. I will round up at the end of the session after enjoying a few of these ciders, so hopefully I can also be able to say a few words at the end after enjoying a few ciders. But if there's any questions, please let us know. Enjoy the ciders. It's going to be a fun event. And without further ado, I'll pass you over to Adi. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Hello, and thank you so much for coming along and joining us. Had you all heard of Ramborn before? Or had anyone not heard of us?
Yes, we are.
So I'm not so sure. Fantastic. Well, even better if you haven't heard, because that's always great to find more people to share our story with. So we're the first cider producer in Luxembourg, but I should say the first in a long time, really, because it is a tradition here that goes back at least as far as the Romans. It's an ancient tradition, and you can see that as you drive around the Luxembourgish countryside. These old trees are just part of the Luxembourgish landscape, and they have been for a very long time. It's a tradition that's been dying out, and that Ramborn started to kind of revive, and that includes reviving those trees. So the cider making has been fun, but also the reviving of those trees has taken on so much of our imaginations and our time that it's become a really important part of the business. And so that's where Andrew referred to this B Corp certification that we got. This is a movement of about 3,500 companies around the world in loads of different industries, who are all kind of looking for ways, the best ways to use business as a force for good. So kind of there's a lot of power in being a successful business, and there's different ways you can spend that power, as it were. And we're trying to find ways to kind of constantly put back into, whether it's our community, whether it's the planet, or whether it's just continuing to grow the company. And that's, it's looking across those things. So we're a carbon negative business that we've measured and calculated. So every bottle of Ramborn that you drink tonight, you'll be offsetting about 17.5 grams. So by the end of the evening, you might need to drink a few more Ramborns before offsetting the Zoom call itself. But there's a lot more as well. We've got lots of food waste use because these fruit can't be used for eating. Gabe will talk a little bit more about the fruit specifically later. But yeah, if you're interested to hear more detail about the business of Ramborn itself, I'm here for any questions about that as well. Gabe, who's with us tonight, aka the Ciderologist, as seen on BBC Countryfile, I think that's right, as well as Channel 4. Roughly every month or so, you're there presenting your ciders and showcasing cider and perry from around the world and from around the UK, and that's one of the biggest platforms I think cider has had in a long time. And Gabe's been at the front of that. And so there is nobody who could be better suited to giving you an intro to cider as a whole. And as he said, he's been to Luxembourg several times. He knows Ramborn extremely well. So not just in a general sense, but in a specific sense, he's got it covered as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mr. Cook. Gabe.
Thank you very much, AD, from one facially haired Englishman to another. Good evening to you all. I do hope that you are well. It is, well, as you can see, the weather's quite nice in Devon today. But if I look out my window, it's also a beautiful sunny summer's day. Summer is here, which if you know England, that means today and tomorrow. It's all good, fantastic. And yes, congratulations, AD and Ramborn, on your B Corp certification. That's a really big thing for you, for cider. I just worked out that if I wanted to offset my own body weight by drinking Ramborn cider, I'd have to drink 600 bottles. Oh well, I'm up for a challenge. And doing good for the environment as well. So what do you know? Right, good evening. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all thirsty. That's the most important thing. My name is Gabe, and I'm called the Ciderologist, which obviously is a completely made-up name. But most of the things I seem to do tend to be made up because I am the world's foremost, stroke only, independent cider advocate. So I'm pretty niche, you could say, which is good for me because there's not anybody else doing what I do. But you know, it's a bit of a challenge as to why that's the case. Cider's a big global industry. In the UK alone, cider is worth £3.1 billion as an industry, as a category. But yet there's only one person who's independently championing and advocating it. And that's me, rather luckily. And why cider? Well, it's all about where I'm from. I'm from a little village called Dimmock. You're going to hear that probably a few times tonight. And it sits right on the Gloucestershire-Herefordshire border in the west of England, the heartland cider area. Lots of great beaches. And I grew up with this cider heritage all around me, the trees, the culture, and some cider makers, and went to visit a few of them, enjoyed drinking them. And then I went and lived on a small cider farm. I quite literally lived in a shed in the garden for a year, learning the art, the craft, and the mystique of cider making. And at the end of it, I drank quite a lot of cider, but I'd also learned about how the cider was made, but also the significance of wildlife and biodiversity and the orchards and the apple varieties and the cultural significance of it. And that's really what got me excited. And I've been working in cider ever since, for the last 15 years. I've worked for big cider makers as a cider maker. The one incident where it wasn't really my fault, but accidentally 200,000 litres of cider went down the drain. It wasn't really my fault. The boss believed me. So I decided that maybe talking about cider was a better route than making cider. And so I went to work for Heineken, world's biggest cider maker, with their Strongbow cider brand, doing some lovely work there. The highlight of my time in the corporate world, I'll show you by changing the visage behind me, was that I got to meet somebody very special. If I duck down, you'll see she's absolutely delighted to see me. Can't you tell? Maybe she wasn't a cider fan after all, I don't know. Anyway, let's go back. So after presenting a bottle of cider to Her Majesty the Queen, I was promptly asked to leave the country. And so I went all the way to New Zealand, where I made some cider. And I also worked at a winery. And it was there that I discovered just how similar the winemaking and the cider making processes are, as you are about to discover. But I came home to the UK, sometimes question why, but I did so because I wanted to do precisely what I'm doing now, which is acting as the ciderologist, this independent advocate. So I write, gratuitous plug number one of the evening, there'll be plenty. I wrote a book, which you can just see, called Ciderology, and you can buy it on Amazon. And you know what? It's worth buying because, bear with me, as well as having some great cider makers featured from all across Australia and New Zealand and in all parts of the world. There is also, bear with me, it's worth it. Oh, there we go, the Ramborn Cider Co, which you can just about see. There we go. They feature in World's Best Cider because they really are one of the world's best cider makers, and this is what we're going to be discovering this evening. So I write, I teach, I taste, I train. I've written the UK's first cider sommelier program. As Eddie say, I occasionally pop on TV to waffle on about cider too. Have you gathered that I'm quite passionate about cider yet? Good. This is how we're going to be rolling tonight. But it's not necessarily, I mean, I drink all drinks, but cider really is my passion. And that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. So first things first, you look quite thirsty. You might hurt me if we don't get on at least sipping the first cider. If you're within range, if you're going to take them one by one out of the fridge, that's grand. If you want to take them all out now, happy with either. But we're going to start with Ramborn original medium dry cider. So crack that open. Whilst you're doing that, I'm going to tell you something. So cider is a fruit fermentation. It's you know, like wine is a fruit fermentation. The fruits with wine obviously is grapes. With cider, it's apples. But the basic premise, the approach, the process, when you approach cider making is very akin to winemaking. You get fruit, you squeeze it, you extract juice, yeast converts the sugar in that juice into alcohol. Hey presto, there you go. The difference, of course, is that grapes have quite a lot more sugar than apples do. And so there's more alcohol is achieved. But it's basically, that is the principle. And exactly the same with wine, whereby the variety or the varieties that you utilize are the primary determinant of how that wine is going to end up. It's exactly the same with cider. So if you utilize you know, a Sauvignon Blanc grape, you're not going to be able to achieve a wine that tastes like Cabernet Sauvignon. They are quite different. Similarly, if you're going to utilize an apple that's lovely and light and crisp, it's not going to be able to present itself as being bold, rich, and earthy. It's exactly the same with cider. And that is what we're going to be exploring tonight, as well as a range of other techniques. So as Adi said, I've been over to Luxembourg a few times, and even coming to land into Luxembourg City on the aeroplane, looking out the window, I could see there were old remnant trees, remnants of orchards. And, you know, I knew I was going to visit a cider maker and there was going to be something there. But to see it so clearly before it even got on the ground was amazing. And, you know, there really is this old heritage and these old trees. And so there is this fantastic heritage. So it's a great thing that Ramborn has is reinvigorating that heritage. Right, have you all got your cider, your Ramborn original medium dry? Straight in the glass already. Gosh, you're quick and clean. All right. Before anything, I'll pour mine. We're going to do well, I mean, we're going to do a cheers, but if you're on mute, then you're just going to do it to your own room anyway. So maybe we'll unmute it, okay? I'm going to teach you this. I'm going to do it every time. The phrase, the term is wassail, and that is Old English, and in cider country, that means be whole or good health. So after three, we're going to do a hearty wassail. Are you with me? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Wassail!
Wassail!
Oh, good effort. Well done, people. It'll get much easier as the night goes on, and we're on to cider number 5. Don't worry. We'll be well in the zone then. So we are going to approach this sipping of cider a little bit how we would do with wine. We are going to inspect how it looks, how it smells, and how it tastes. So what do you, so thrust your glass into the air. There's no real need to do that. I just like people like thrusting their glasses into the air and being very, very obedient. It's quite fun. Anyway, I'll get over my power trip. But what can we see? What does it look like? The coloration. And you're very welcome to shout out and participate. This is participatory. If you want to get involved, you go for it. But for me, that looks like a really deep, rich golden color. Beautiful brightness and clarity. It's really zingy, really bright. And we've got some very fine beads of carbonation in there. Right, give it a swirl. Don't spill it over yourself like I normally do. And get your nose in. What can we get? Interesting. There's a few different characters in here. Come on, somebody's dying to say one particular word, I bet you. Who's dying to shout out apples? Yeah, every time I do a cider taste, and I say, what aromatic characters do you get? And there's already somebody who goes, apples, in the background. And, you know, in this instance, I think that is actually fair game. We do have a lovely apple character, almost like an apple skin kind of character in there. But also quite fruity, maybe a little bit of stone fruit in there. It smells rather gorgeous. Right, let's have a taste. Cheers to you. So, this cider is made from some classic apples from Luxembourg and from within your sort of region, your geography is sort of Western Germany and Switzerland in this geography. Classic apples in here, including the Rambo apple and things like Boskop as well. These are classic acid-driven. So by acidity, that sounds a bit of a harsh word. What I mean by that is sharp, zing, crisp, fresh. If I'm ever talking about acidity, that's the character that I'm talking about. And where in the mouth does it hit you? I nearly knocked over my glass then. It's right at the front of your mouth. It's the first thing that sort of tingles on the tongue, almost on your lips. It's zingy and fresh right at the front. Really lovely and light. But then it quite quickly dives as it moves slightly over your palate into a lovely sort of luscious, slightly almost stone fruity, I'd say, almost a little bit sort of peachy. You know, when you bite into a really nice, ripe peach or nectarine and it all sort of dribbles down your chin a little bit and you'd be feeling a little bit embarrassed, but you don't really care because it's just so unctuous and lovely. I get a little bit of that in it. And then we've got a nice soft finish. It lingers for a little while. It's just nice and gentle, nice and fun. A little bit of texture for some very soft tannins at the back. We're going to talk a little bit more about tannin as we go through. But this, for me, is a classic cider in terms of balance. You know, when we talk about balance, it's about the presence of these different characters and the fact that they are in good proportions, that they work well with each other. Sometimes ciders can be, same with wines, can be quite dominant of a particular character. But this is the flagship brand from Ramborn. It sits at 5.8%, which, depending upon how you're approaching it, you might think is, oof, 5.8 is a bit strong, or you might go, oh, 5.8, that's actually quite light. Because I talked about cider being made like a wine, but all around the world, it is mostly consumed more like a beer. And part of that is because of the alcoholic content. And so it does get presented a little bit more like a beer than a wine too, as we have here, a 330ml bottle, single serve, carbonated, etc. So cider can often, and is, you know, very predominantly understood and viewed and tasted all around the world as being kind of beer-like in terms of the way that you approach it. So if you're approaching this as a beer, 5.8% is a little on the heftier side of things. But if you do approach it like a wine, which, given that it's made like a wine and that its sensory characters are very wine-like, 5.8% for a wine, this is a very, very light wine. And I'm drinking it out of a wine glass. You've got your lovely little half glasses, I think, quite probably. And so this is, you're sipping it, you're savoring it, you're enjoying it. You don't have to completely just suck it down every time. Don't get me wrong, there are occasions when a pint of cider that goes down your gullet quicker than a quick thing on a hot summer's day is one of the best things. But this is the thing, not all ciders are able to perform that function and do that. There are different types and style of cider. So yeah, 5.8%, lightly sparkling, super refreshing. What do you think to that? Who likes that cider? Put your hand in the air. Who's not so keen on that cider? You are allowed to be honest here. You are allowed to, security, AD, can we send the team in? Yeah, okay, yeah, have a word, yeah. Only joking, of course. I have the confidence as the world's foremost stroke only international cider advocate that these are all great ciders and great exponents of their style. You're going to try some very, very different drinks tonight, and hopefully, Leon and co, there'll be one in there that you enjoy, so I don't have to call security next time. This is it. If you think about wine, you know, if we're saying that this is cider, you don't like that cider. Well, if you said wine, if you drank a glass of let's say, you know, a lovely Mosel Riesling, but actually you didn't really like sort of fresh, you know, acidity and zinginess, and your preference was more for Rioja, well, no wonder you don't like it, because it's completely different in its flavor profile, and you can get that breadth of difference in flavor and you know, sensory and aromatic profile between these ciders, as you will discover. So if you don't like this one, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to like every drink, although some of us possibly do. Are there any questions about that cider at all? Or if you've got any questions at any time, just shout out. Alan's having a great time on the edge of the universe. Jost is in either Thailand or China by the looks of it. AD is in ancient Rome. I'm not sure, you know.
I'm in Luxembourg. This is just Luxembourgish. Yeah.
Are you still down in the Grunt?
Exactly
Yeah,
that.
beautiful down there, amazing. You really do feel like you've stepped back about 2,000 years. Not your house particularly, but the absolutely wonderful. So there we
I must
go.
say, Alan's lighting is amazing because it really looks like the light is like matching his background. That's phenomenal.
Did you not know that this is the world's first ever link up between? You saw that Richard Branson released the video or the snapshot of the spaceship that's going to go 60. Yeah. Well, Alan's got a sneak preview, and he's up there now, live. The world's first
See how committed I was.
interstellar cider tasting session. Do you know what? I had a friend who she's from Herefordshire, from cider country, and she's a doctor, and she managed to get a gig on an Italian, the European Space Agency, an Italian research station, Concordia station in Antarctica, and she took some cider with her. And I was going to do a tasting with her, but the technology broke. They went offline for a couple of days, so it didn't work. But if we've had Antarctica, why can't we have intergalactic cider tasting sessions? Anyway, we're digressing already, and we're only at cider number 1. Let's move on to cider number 2, which isn't a cider. I know, I'm messing with things already, but bear with me. The second drink you're going to have is the Ramborn Perry. Okay. Take that one out of the fridge, go grab that. Now, the reason why I say that it's not a cider is because it isn't actually a cider. It's called a perry because this is a drink that is made from fermented pears rather than apples. Now, there isn't much perry made all around the world, and the only people that make perry are cider makers. And so if we didn't include perry within the cider sphere, it's not big enough of a drink and a category to include anywhere else. So we kind of almost call perry a style of the broader cider family, just for ease of being able to explain it. But it is an interesting and a unique drink. I come from Dimmock. I told you I'd say it more than once. This beautiful village in an area where it's famous for its pears and for its perry in the UK. It's the perry area. Cider area extends quite a long way. Perry area is quite small. And so I'm quite proud of the fact that I come from my kind of perry country, and always gives me a little bit of sort of swagger. And AD sort of said, oh, we've got some pears and some pear trees too in Luxembourg. And yeah, okay, whatever. You're not going to make any good drinks out of it. There's not been much though, is there? And so again, on this plane coming into land, I thought, well, bloody hell, there's some pear trees down there. You can, unmistakable in the shape of the tree, you can literally see it from a plane. I was like, okay, all right. And then AD took me to an orchard near the farm, and there was a pear tree. I was like, okay, it's quite good. And it's like, then come and see the good place. Oh, sorry, just to mention that back in the Shire where I am from, there is a wonderful old house. It's one of the oldest houses in England, and it's got 900 years old, and it's got a lovely long driveway leading up to it. It's got these wonderful pear trees lining the sides. That were planted in 1710. These pear trees can grow really, really old. Absolutely amazing. So I'm coming in, and he says, oh, we've got an avenue of pear trees too. I'm like, yeah, all right, what? That's someone's driveway into their house. We get up onto a road, and it's a public road just above Schengen. And well, you could sort of see this, you know, a couple of trees at the end. It's like, oh, they're nice big trees. And then we drive along for a bit, couple of 100 meters, and every 10 meters or so on each side of the road there's pear tree, half a kilometer. About 2.5 kilometers later, this spectacular avenue of pear trees ends, and I'm gobsmacked and made very, very humble, which is a bit of a rarity. So Luxembourg has this amazing pear heritage too. So pour yourself a glass and let's have a go. So the first thing that we know about this, again, we've got this beautiful, deep, rich, golden color, even golder possibly than the last one. But the difference here is going to be on the nose. A wassail to you all. Cheers. Enjoy. let's have a little sniff. Oh, wow, there's all sorts of interesting things going on here. Does anybody feel the urge to shout out anything that they can smell from their drink? You're going to get very bored of hearing my voice solely all the time if you don't want to interject. That's fine. I'm getting honeycomb, or actually it's honeysuckle. There's a little bit of honeysuckle that grows in the hedgerow just next to my house, and that actually, I think, smells of that.
Yeah, I was going to say more caramel kind of.
And
sweet,
definitely there's some caramel in there too. There's a little bit of sort of slightly tropical fruity bubble gum there too. Hang about. Any other characters in there? What else are you getting? Have another try. Sorry, I fear that I might have actually poured the last one again. Let's try that again. Let's see what the colour is. It's actually slightly paler than the last one, isn't it? There we go.
In any case, you don't feel smell take the acid. It's much sweeter, and it's not the acid who is carrying the taste.
Very much, very much. There was a real florality to this.
Yeah.
Absolutely, most definitely, and that's very classic with pears because they contain a lot of citric acid, and so they share a lot of characters with other fruits as well. So let's have a taste. Cheers. So this is very interesting. We do have some nice acidity up the front. But I would say, yeah, a bit more sort of citrusy, or maybe even slightly grapefruity. It's quite zingy, quite sort of cutting at the front. Then we get a little bit of sort of soft fruitiness, but it quite quickly turns into a slightly mouth drying sensation. Who's got a slightly puckered mouth? And this is from tannin. Tannin is what you'd get in red wines and in tea and coffee. And what it does, it's naturally contained within the fruit. Certain varieties of apple or pear, they contain these tannins, and that's what they do. They help to provide sort of mouthfeel and texture and structure. They can fill all the corners of your mouth and provide some robustness. And yeah, the astringency, it's called, that's the sensation of that sort of mouth drying. So even though this drink has got a reasonable amount of sugar in there, it's not the sweetest, but there's some sugar in there. You don't sort of perceive it as being quite so sweet because of that mouth drying sensation. Now, this is probably, if you were to eat one of those pears, then well, you shouldn't, because they would be very, very unpleasant, basically. They do not taste like dessert pears. The tannin, that bitterness, that astringency, you'll be able to taste into the fruit. So these are characters that only come from these very special pears, which are grown in your part of Central Europe to make this drink, Perry, but then they're also utilized to make schnapps. And there are a whole host of very special varieties in your part of the world. Nelkiersberner, I think, Moosberner, different varieties that are grown for the sole purpose of making these drinks, and absolutely not for eating. Now, the first time that I came across this, you can see it's got a few gold medals on there. This is one of the most award-winning perries in the world. And I know that because I've run most of the competitions where it has won, and I've not even been judging. I've just been the person who watches the judges judge, and it frequently wins either a gold medal or indeed the trophy for the best or a best perry of its category. So what do you think to this? Who likes the perry? Might be a little bit more of a Marmite one, this one, possibly. Who's
I need to call off security.
Say again, sorry?
I need to call off the security.
Call off the security. There we go, you see? Maybe it's a tactical.
Just a quick question. We mentioned the comparison between wine as well. Is there food that you would pair cider with?
Absolutely, yes. We were going to bring that up at some stage, so you've teed us up a treat, Andrew. Well, do you know what? Adie's actually even way more of a foodie than me. But just to say that, in the way that you approach matching foods with wine or wine with food, depending on which way you want to do it, depending on your sensory characters, where have you got freshness, where have you got texture or richness or oakiness or lightness in terms of intensity. Exactly the same with cider and perry. You can approach it the same way. AD, what would you match with this perry, do you think?
So did you all get one of these with your box? Did you? Hopefully you did. If not, let me know and I'll send one out to you.
We didn't.
Okay, then I will. Yeah, make sure security brings some when they.
Yeah, if they're on their way anyway, then let them bring one.
Yeah, so that's really. I mean, thinking about wine. I mean, there are kind of actually with wine. There's all these rules, like you can't have a white wine with a steak, or there's all these kind of right and wrong ways of doing things. Whereas with cider, no one's going to tell you you're doing it wrong. We're all finding the way together, because that people have always paired cider with food, but it's not had that kind of strictness in the way that wine has developed this etiquette, and so it's a free for all. But there are some sensory things we can guide us through. So for me, I really like this one with like something quite rich and fatty with a bit of spice. So like a lamb curry can work really well for me with this. Going to the other end, you can also go for something like a wood-fired pizza, where you've got the kind of fat and protein of the cheese with that kind of slightly burnt taste of the crust. That's the sort of thing that can go, and the acidity from the tomatoes then against this kind of slightly lower acid but high tannin drink, but with the fizz and the brightness that the kind of Italian lager might give you. So there's all kinds of things you can try, and the perry itself is actually wonderful, because that kind of aroma of the light stone fruit, like a white wine, with that mouthfeel of the rich tannins, that's like a playground for chefs when we take it to restaurants, because they've not had those two things in a drink to play with before. And that's something that I would definitely encourage experimenting when you're serving this with food, and then telling me what you discover, because we're all trying to figure out the best way of doing these things. Gabe was there for a dinner we did at a 2 Michelin starred restaurant in Frankfurt. And this was paired with a lobster with fried cauliflower, I think, which was just utterly inspired. It's something I never would have come up with. And what's great is that the chef
never thought a lobster and fried cauliflower. Come on, AD.
Landlocked country here. We're not all by the imaginary sea. I just want to bring up Philip's point, tasting of crunchy. I quite like that. That's quite good, that caramel and honeysuckle thing coming through. Catherine said, not all of us can taste pear. I want to throw this back to Gabe, because this is something he talks about when he mentioned the apple point earlier. And if you refer back to wine, I think that gives you the right analogy here.
Quite, absolutely. So I was going to pick up on that. Yeah, but because of the transformative power of fermentation, and because of the nature of these specific kinds of pears, you don't get the inherent character of the original fruit come through in the final product as you would expect. My slightly flippant throwback to you, Catherine, at this point would be, how many wines taste of grapes? And that's just, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of true that you don't necessarily, with a lot of ciders, and especially types of ciders that are made in the part of the UK that I'm from, and a little bit more akin to the next cider that we're going to try. Actually, there are properties and characters in there that are quite far removed from the original fruit. And as we've seen with the perry here, sometimes you can actually pick up characters from other fruits. So you might say that there's more grapefruit in this one possibly, or even a little bit of pineapple or something, than there is pear. And I would absolutely agree with you on that. And that's the way that different sensory characters can work their way through during kind of fermentation. But it is a really good point, because if you are, part of the thing is that so many of the ciders that let's talk about cider and talk about maybe some of cider's issues. You've all got a preconception about what cider is or can be, and especially if you're you know, from the UK or spent any time in the UK, that doesn't always equate with being something that is highly valued or worth savoring or even worth matching with food. It's you know, it's a cheap drink, it's an easy form of alcohol, maybe one of the first alcoholic drinks that we overindulge with when we're the age of the young woman with Nicola down there, quite possibly. Don't drink it, drink sensibly, people, okay? Sensibly, thank you. You know, a lot of those ciders are back sweetened with a lot of sugar or a lot of apple juice, and the inherent character that just comes through is sweetness. And I'm not against sweetness at all. It's about how you utilize it and what you balance it with potentially. But just a sweety, fruity, juicy cider generally does not make a particularly complex or interesting cider. It's just that the vast majority of ciders made globally, especially the very large ciders in very large volume, that tends to be how they present themselves a little bit more. So to have the opportunity to try drinks that have got texture and zinginess and maybe some fruitiness and other characters in there that are just from the apples or just from the pears, I think showcases the versatility and the range that you potentially can get. Any questions on our wonderful multi award-winning Perry there? If not, then we will move on to our next cider, which is going to be the farmhouse. Remove your farmhouse from the fridge, please, ladies and gentlemen. Now, where I'm from in the UK, remember the name? Dimmock, well done. And it's in the heart of what I call the classic, you know, West Country tradition of cider in the UK. Now, for those of you who are from or are familiar with the UK, this might conjure up images of little lanes in Devon with high hedges and cycling along to a farmer down the gate, and you know, there's got some wonderful scrumpy, some really traditional cider that you drink 3 pints of, and then you get back on your bike and you're back to front upside down and you're in the hedge before you know it. These bold ciders are made using, and they're not all rough farmhouse scrumpies, of course, that is but one image, but we are talking about a culture and a heritage of making cider from very specific varieties of apple that have been grown for the sole purpose of making cider in the UK for probably nigh on 1,000 years. We call them cider apples. We are very smart in the West Country. Cider apples, make cider, cider apples. And what characterizes and differentiates these cider apples from eating apples, from dessert apples, is these tannic properties. So where I'm from, the orchards all around and the cider that is made are all very much sort of tannic in nature, with lower levels of sort of crispness and zinginess. Now, this next cider you're going to try is made from some high tannin apples. But the fact is that, as well as some of the classic apple varieties that provided the like cider number 1 in the original there, the Rambo and the Boskop and things like that, that provides some nice texture and some nice acidity. There were and are still hanging on in there some traditional varieties that provide some of this tannin. So this farmhouse cider is an exploration into the world of tannin, and you can hazard a guess about that from the way that it looks. First of all, it's by some distance the darkest cider that we've had a look at this evening, and tannin within the cider can provide coloration, and that's exactly what it's doing here. So have a swirl, have a sniff. Now we're getting some different characters in here. Is anybody picking up maybe some slightly woody characters, or maybe even some slightly clovey characters and slightly spicy characters in there? It's quite rich, almost some like dark cherries or plums or prunes almost possibly. So there's some really deep, rich, intense aromatic characters. They are called volatile phenolics. Term of the day, ladies and gentlemen, volatile phenolics. They are these aromatic compounds associated with these classic tannic apples that can give boldness and richness. Right, cheers. Let's have a taste and see what you get. Gosh, if you weren't awake 3 seconds ago, you will be now, because we've got to very exploding things going on. I've been prattling on about the tannin, and we will get onto that in a moment. But before we get to the tannin, hello sharpness. Gosh, that's made my eyes come alive. Wonderful, intense acidity. This will be utilizing varieties such as Erbachhofer, which I'm sure none of you will have heard of, apart from maybe, because it's classic old-fashioned Luxembourgish apple that you definitely don't want to eat, because this is how it would taste to bite into. Incredible, intense, sort of sherbety, almost metallic zing to start with. But before you've got a chance to kind of like, that's come in this direction, but before you've had a chance to recoil from it, straight behind it becomes this really, really intense, grippy, almost like espresso kind of grippy, mouth-drying astringency. This is described as being a dry cider, and that's on account of the fact that it's got little sugar in there, but also the extra mouth-drying sensation that is achieved from the fact that you know, we've got these kind of tannic characters in there. This one, I suspect, might be a little bit more challenging to some people. What do you think of that? Who likes that cider? Yeah, it's a little bit more. Yeah, well done. It's you know, one of those drinks that you've probably never. It's unlikely that you would have tasted anything like this before. So it will necessitate a few sips. I'm giving you license to have a few sips. And this is a cider tasting and not a wine tasting session, so you really do have to drink it. You know, so much of the impact of that tannin is at the back of the throat and on the swallow. So what you're going to do, you know, you're going to have a taste.
I think I prefer this with ice.
Okay, you would like it a little bit cooler, possibly.
Well, with ice. Is that a thing to do, to drink cider with ice, or?
Well, it's a very, very good question. Sort of generally, historically, not so much. But it was, 14 years ago when Magners came into the UK marketplace and did a big advertising campaign, advertising and suggesting that you drink their cider over ice. It did coincide with one of the hottest summers on record at that point in the Football World Cup, so everybody was in the beer garden, and it proved a real hit. And if you're a fan of Withnail then Withnail likes to have his cider over ice as well. There's a good movie for you, Richard E. Grant. Ultimately, if there's a way that you like that cider that improves your enjoyment of it, then I don't think that can be a bad thing. If you think that you prefer it over ice, bravo, good for you. I'm all for, again, part of cider, the cider is fun, right? That's really what I want to try and get across, is that in terms of people, but also just in terms of the way the drinks present themselves and talk to you. So it doesn't quite have the austerity of wine. It's not so that cider can't be classy or serious. It can be if it needs to be, but it's not too, you know, looking in the mirror like craft beer is as well. It's just fun and easygoing and adaptable. And if you think that that's how it's best, roll with it. Absolutely fine.
Yeah, I mean, we used to have a stance on that. This is an old label that we've got on the back there. It says "No need for ice," that we put on originally, and actually on the new labels it doesn't say that anywhere. We took it off completely because we found some bars serving it with ice, where, you know, some places had come up with these amazing ways of serving our cider. Liquid, when it was open just down the road from here, they used to serve it in a jam jar with a slice of apple full of ice, and they'd give you the can of cider with this jam jar full of ice, and it just felt really cool. Like it was one of my favorite bars to drink Ramborn in, because they'd kind of created for themselves this way of serving it that the people who went there liked, and that was really cool. And after seeing that, we decided we just kind of, there's no sense in telling people how to do things or not, because like one of the joys of being in cider is that etiquette, that strictness is just, it's not there. And no, I don't think we're not in any rush to create it, I would say.
Absolutely not. And so it's the great fun. And, you know, cider's at this really interesting opportunity and this really interesting moment where you've got all these regions of classic heritage and culture, the UK, northern France, northern Spain, your part of sort of Central Europe, Western Germany and Switzerland, etc., where there is this old tradition, but there is a burgeoning growth of new cider making all around the world. And in fact, the next cider definitely sort of plays into that. So why don't you get out your Cascade hopped cider as your next one? So although places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, USA, you know, they don't necessarily have the old heritage of cider making that we do, but they certainly do have apples. They grow a lot of dessert apples, and they can be very creative with it, and very popular it is too. Did you know that the UK is the world's #1 cider producer and consumer? Very proud. About 10 litres a year per person we drink. Not bad going. But the second, you know, there are really interesting things, like the second biggest cider drinking nation in the world is South Africa, for example, which I didn't know until not so long ago. And places like the USA and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, they're all in the top 12, you know. So there's big growth of cider making in those areas, but they don't have the old heritage, and they don't often have the old-fashioned varieties that you've been tasting thus far, with a lot of sort of boldness and texture. But what there is a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation, of course, especially places where there is a strong beer influence, a strong craft beer influence. The idea of adding things into the drink and having a play with it is something that's quite popular. And so out of the Pacific Northwest of the USA, in Oregon, and specifically out of Portland, the idea and the concept of dry hopping ciders came out. So adding hops into cider at the end of the process to add some aromatic and some slight textural components. There is a guy in Portland, his cider maker is called Reverend Nat. Reverend Nat's Hard Cider, and he's a bit of an innovator and one of the cool guys of the US cider scene. And his most basic, his most boring cider is a dry hopped apricot infused cider called Hallelujah Hopricot. And that's the most basic. That's like base level. It all goes more crazy from there. I particularly liked the one with fermented carrot juice. That was quite nice. Brer Rabbit, it was called. Anyway, so you've got all this creativity. And so this is an example of a cider that definitely takes one step out of the new world and is bringing it over here to Europe. And it is this. It's an infusion of Cascade hops. And AD, remind me, I always get it wrong. Are these German or US Cascade hops?
The ones you have at the moment are German, yeah. And the next batch, them just being filled at the moment, they'll be German hops as well. But yeah, we actually just found a really good hop farm in the UK that's really interesting, and they're growing some UK grown Cascade, which I think could be quite fun to work with. So we're looking for growers around Europe. It's a very, very popular hop, so the supply is really erratic. But because all these growers are trying new things with it, it's just as rich an area for innovation, even within that parameter. It's quite cool. Yeah, really fun.
Yeah, and 80, why do you put it in a can rather than a bottle? Or is it sometimes in a can, sometimes in a bottle? Is that just the way it got?
So we did the first batch in a bottle and got kind of lucky because nothing bad happened. But there's a reason that the good beers don't tend to come in clear glass. And that's typically something called skunking, which is where the UV rays interact with the oils from the hop, the aroma oils, and just give all these kind of crazy off flavors. And so we had the choice of either putting it in clear glass, risking that, putting it in dark glass, which we don't really use for anything. We don't have any dark glass, or trying something that the craft brewers do all the time. You know, if you were to go to Artisanal in Clausen or Craft Corner in Bonnevoie or something, there's cans from 3, 6, 10 euros each. Cans in craft beer are really high value stuff, and it's because it looks after the liquid really well. It's a little different with cider than it is for beer, but it's something that we've had a lot of fun with. But it's the first question we get every single time. Yeah, absolutely, and it's an important one. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I didn't let you down then. But are you the only one then making this hop cider in Europe, or?
No, there's a few others. There's one guy in Austria who basically only makes hopped ciders.
Okay.
Fantastic stuff. Really, he's good friends of Reverend Nat, actually, called Carl. He makes one called Blackstock. And more UK producers are trying something with hops.
Yeah.
Their tax system makes it a little tricky, but as long as people are willing to pay for it, then they can get some stuff. There's really great hop ciders coming out of the UK.
Start on this one, man. Since we're talking about it.
There's a hopped cider coming out of Switzerland too. There's a producer called Mole. They've done a hopped cider as well. So yeah, it's a trend. So open up your can and give it a pour, and get it in the glass. And obviously as well as the actual branding speaking to you and trying to appeal to different consumers, the actual packaging can appeal too. And because there is this very strong association with this craft beer movement, these ingredients and flavor-filled, intense beers coming in this pack format, the sheer fact that this cider has gone into that pack format is another thing, along with the fact that it is hopped, that is hopefully going to appeal to some of these beer drinkers and bring them across. What kind of aromas do we get? Do you pick up the hop character on the nose here? What do you think? And I suppose whether you like this drink or not is dependent on whether you like the smell of hops or not. So if you're not really into hoppy beer, this probably isn't going to be the cider for you. Again, that's absolutely fine. This is just part of the wonderful breadth and spectrum of different kinds of styles. So we do get that slightly, sort of piney, kind of like, resinous, slightly sort of tropical nose. It's quite intense on the nose. It's supposed to be, by dry hopping at the end, you get some of those characters, but then into the palate, have a taste. Cheers. This is where we do have some light acidity, this fruitiness, but then we get a little bit of sort of dusty kind of bitterness in there. And I think that actually might be coming from the hop too. Just lends a little bit of weight in the palate, and a slightly kind of like spicy and slightly herbaceous character that we get in there. What do we think? Is it, who likes it? Who thinks that's, there we go, resounding success. Again, it can be one that goes different ways. There are some people who don't like beer at all for various different reasons, and just one sniff of that, no, just because it's got those hops, just that association with the beer in the mind, and regardless of how it tastes, you're just thinking, I'm not going to like it, I'm not liking it, I'm not liking it, I'm not liking it. So, and that's the attitude that some people kind of have, and that's a sort of psychological kind of thing, and can be quite hard to move past. But whenever I've been out doing tasting sessions with AD, for some people, this is their favorite of all the ciders. Like this one really specifically is what shouts out to them, and they may be drinkers or not. Is that you, Mr. Rebecca? Is this your favorite one so far? There you go. You could give me your name rather than say Mr. Rebecca. It's up to you, but that's fine. Mr. Kelleher. So
Jack.
Jack.
Oh, Jack. Sorry, Jack. Thank you.
Can I ask a question actually? What varieties of apples do you use? That might be a question for Edie, but I'd be interested in the variety of apples you use.
So this is a really similar blend to our original. We use our sort of acid forward because, as Gabe said, there's a lot of other things coming from the hop. So you don't want to introduce, I mean, you can, in this blend, we didn't want to introduce too many kind of really complex tannins going on, because we wanted that kind of marrying of the fresh apple aromas and the fresh acidity with that kind of tropical citrus pine notes from the hop. So it's sort of your Boskops, your Winter Rambour, Rheinische Rambour, so the Rambo family, and then some cider fruit in there as well. So just a very broad mix of the fruits that grow on these traditional trees. So yeah.
Eddie, just a quick question as well. If I've gone to Somerset, I always have this, if I have something on tap, it's generally some cloudy, I don't know if it's scrumpy or something, but I see all of yours are very crisp and clear. Is there a particular reason for that, or do you have also a kind of a cloudy cider as well?
Because of the way we pack our ciders, it's not really possible for us to make anything cloudy because we're filtering at the end. That's how we're stabilizing. So what we're not doing is pasteurizing in most of our ciders. The canned ciders are pasteurized because it's really, really insanely difficult to sterile fill a can. But our ciders, because it avoids heating them, which reduces the emissions, and it also avoids cooking the liquid. If you're pasteurizing, you're heating the liquid to a certain degree, 62 for at least 11 minutes. You know, anyone who's spent time in a kitchen knows that that will do enough to a liquid to change the flavor, change the chemical makeup of what you're serving. And that's the same with the liquid. And if you're pasteurizing, for us, if we're pasteurizing, we're losing a little bit of that the fresh fruit aromas that we work with. So consequence of that is filtering as the other way of stabilizing the liquid. Yeah, I mean, some kind of cloudier ciders are in fact more natural or more kind of less intervention going on, but there are also some cloudy ciders where that cloud is reintroduced deliberately. It really, there's, even just by saying cloudy, it could be a huge range of things, because there's also some amazing ciders that are really low intervention that come out crystal clear. There's a huge range of different clarities and brightnesses of cider. And I think what's great about food and drink is that on their own, a quality like clear or cloudy doesn't mean good or bad, and it's kind of, there's all these different ways of expressing that fruit. Yeah, in Somerset, is cloudy the thing? I'm not so familiar with the West Country ciders as much as Gabe is. So,
well, as I think that the final point actually that Adi made was the kind of most important one, is that cider making is inherently quite a basic process. You do gather the apples. You unlike when making wine, where you can sort of just press grapes and extract the juice. In fact, you can tread them. Well, try treading apples. They're a little bit tougher, and so you have to go through a two-stage process. You have to mill them, chop them first into like a porridge, like a baby food kind of consistency, and then you press them to extract the juice. That juice is packed full of really fermentable sugar, fructose and glucose, and a little bit of sucrose and yeast, whether it be an introduced yeast like a wine yeast or selected yeast, or you could, if you want, to allow it to go a bit wild and spontaneous, a bit like spontaneous sort of lambic beers. Just allow the yeast that lives all around us to convert the sugars into alcohol. And there's a few things that happen. Firstly, nearly every single cider made in the world will start its life as a bone-dry cider. And by that I mean no sugar, none, zilch, nada, because all of the sugar gets converted into alcohol by the fermentation process. Chomp, 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 chomp. It's just that the vast majority of ciders that are presented are not dry. They have lots of sugar. So the majority of sugar is added after the fermentation. So, one accusation that often comes to cider is they're all sweet. Well, that's true because they've been made to be like that. They don't have to be like that. That is a choice of the cider maker because of the various business decisions that they have made. The second thing is that cider will come out as a still cider. Again, think wine. It comes out as a still product. So carbon dioxide is produced as a byproduct of the fermentation process, but the vast majority of cider is made in either wooden vessels or tanks, and it just escapes out the top. So it forms a still cider. If you want to have a sparkling cider, you either need to introduce a bit of carbon dioxide, spritz it up, or you place it into a bottle and it can undertake some of its fermentation in one of the bottles. And this is what we're talking about at the basic premise of the in-bottle fermentation, the champagne process. And you might be excited to hear that the very first recordings of introducing extra sugar into a cider in a bottle actually took place in England, about 7 years before Dom Perignon had even made it to the monastery. So I propose that we should be calling it the English method rather than the Champagne method, but something tells me that they might not be up for that, quite possibly. So, and finally, very long-winded way of getting around to 80s, to the point from Andrew, was the fact that, yeah, the cider, some ciders might settle out a little bit more, but you're always going to get like some degree of haze if you don't filter it. And quite simply, 80 ciders have gone through a filter, and maybe some of those more sort of traditional farmhouse style cider from Somerset, they didn't go through a filter. That per se doesn't make it better or worse, but it is an interesting decision because the majority of consumers think of cider as being something clarified and clear and beautifully bright. So if a cider maker does present their cider which hasn't gone through a filter, it always interests me, what's the thinking behind that? What do they want to try and explain to the consumer? What are they trying to say through the liquid about it being a little bit hazy? Is it that it's more traditional? Is it that it's more less interventionist? Any one of those things could be true. From a beer perspective, the idea of having, you know, hazy beer until even 4 years ago was just a sign of very poor quality. And then this style of beer that came out of the US, the New England IPA style, is all about being cloudy, hazy, or actually being opaque. You know, it looks like eggnog. You know, it's a completely different style of drink. So the world of drinks and what different things mean and how different things are presented, it's changing all the time. And it's about what the cider maker wants to try and present to the consumer. And the next cider is another great example of the cider maker telling a different story once again. We are going to go, if you reach for your Luxembourgish Garden Quince, the rather magnificent looking 750ml bottle, cork and wire, topped with a little piece of real gold by the looks of it, Ada. You're doing this very exquisite product on the top here. Real gold. Anyway, so go and get this last. It's not real gold. Okay, sorry, ladies and gentlemen.
No, don't touch it.
So look at this. You know, if we've had ciders, the first three ciders sort of presented themselves as sort of classic cider, let's say, and the last one maybe a little bit more of a step towards beer. Well, here is this step very much towards wine. So we're talking about these drinks being ostensibly made like a wine, whereby the fruit variety has really important impact over the overarching flavor, and that you can sort of approach it and consider it, and the sensory characters, aromatics and tastes and textures, very similar to how you would approach winemaking. Well, look, they've taken it one step further here, and then in terms of the final presentation of the liquid in this way. And don't you think it looks absolutely magnificent? I certainly do. Bottle, first of all, 750ml. This is obviously something for sharing. You could drink it by yourself if you wanted to, but you know, it's a drink made for sharing. It's a drink made for food. The cork and wire gives it the elegance. The gold embossing on the lovely laid paper. This has got 80s handwork all over it, marketing master. And what I really also like about this is the fact that on the bottom here, we've got 2018 harvest. Remember, again, like wine, these are drinks that are made from a harvest. So the fruit is harvested in the autumn, you collect it, you mill it and press it, get the juice and start fermentation. It ferments and matures over the course of time, and then you package it. And this is an exemplification of what that harvest was like. And even if you picked the exact same apple tree 2 years in a row, depending upon what the weather conditions were like in those 2 different years, you could end up with slightly different flavor profiles, different levels of acidity, certainly different alcohol levels. And so the fact they put the harvest on there, the year, I think is a really, really nice point too. Now, this again is a slightly unique drink. We're stretching the bounds of cider and perry this evening because this is actually made from a different fruit again, the quince, Quitten in German, or not maybe Luxembourgish. I'll leave my Luxembourgish there. It is, if apples and pears are kind of brother and sister, then the quince is kind of the slightly weird uncle that you only meet every other Christmas kind of thing. It is part of the same family, but it's a little bit removed. They're quite, in fact, look, I think I've got, I think I might have a photo to show you what they look like. Where are they? Here we go. Don't they look lovely? Kind of furry, a bit knobbly. I'll leave that behind. We'll roll with that for now. These quints, yeah, so they are what's called a pome fruit. They are part of the broader family, but you normally wouldn't, it's a rarity to see this as a fermented drink. Normally you'd see it as like a quince paste or a jelly to go with cheese, quite intense, but absolutely amazing and absolutely fantastically aromatic. And there's been a very minor thing over the last 2 or 3 years of incorporating either as like a co-fermentation between apples and quince or pears and quince, but it's a bit of a rarity to have just fermented quince. Absolutely, absolutely fantastic. Well, you will tell me. So that carbonation, that's a lovely pop. Again, you're getting all of the cues of this is an elegant drink. Even before you've managed to have a sniff of it, it just feels good, doesn't it? And then getting it into the glass, got the wonderful carbonation. Again, we've got this beautiful golden color, but it really comes to life when you get your nose in there. Get your nose in. Whoa, how insane. I want to watch your faces as you sniff it. Go on. That sounded a really bit weird to say. Reaction. It's just so intense. What do you reckon? What do we get? There's that flow. It stumps me sometimes. Like it smells like a quince. It's a bit of a cop out, of course, but it's quite oily, almost like essential oily. There's almost quite a bit of menthol in there. Some really sort of overripe elderflowers almost. It's just, or actually, it's really jasmine. Actually, there's a lot of jasmine in there as well. That's what I was trying to pick out. For me, that smells absolutely amazing. But I like really aromatic white wines. I like Pinot Gris. I like Riesling. I like Gewürztraminer and Gruner and things like this. So this just naturally appeals to me on the nose. Yeah, tick. It's in my sphere of enjoyment, most definitely. Let's have a taste. Cheers to you all. Wassail, wassail. Wow, absolutely fantastic. So again, we get this sort of wonderful wall, this sheath of just this gentle, tingly. I'm not quite sure if it's a citrusy. Maybe we're back into a slightly grippier, pithy not watermelon, grapefruity kind of character at the front. But again, we got this really nice, grippy astringency. And again, yeah, sort of pith or I'm not sure, was it grapefruit pith or an orange, Seville, blood orange kind of pith maybe in there. But it's juicy, but it's dry as well. There's only a tiny little bit of sugar in there, but it's hiding behind the intense acidity and the grippiness. It presents itself as being quite a dry drink. So, and the sparkle helps to add a little bit of life, a little bit of lift in there, so that it's not too sort of too chunky, kind of too heavyweight. Zingy, light, floral, beautiful on a warm summer's day. What do you think to that? Who likes that cider? Yeah, who's not so keen on it? Who thinks it's a bit OTT, it's a bit much. It's quite intense. I can completely understand if it wasn't for some people. It's pretty kind of full on. So I think that's a really, I personally really like this drink. This will be what me and my girlfriend will drink for the rest of the evening. It will, because we both really like it and enjoy the sensation, the texture, the aroma. It kind of really does it for us. But it presents itself obviously as being quite different. And again, yes, we've got the fact that it's in this 750ml bottle and has that kind of experience. I bet this, Adi, what food would you put this with? Adi, are you there? Calling Luxembourg.
But for me, I really like, I think, for me. Oh, can you hear me? I'm being told my internet is unstable.
You're good now. We can hear you. Say again.
Wonderful. Some game, I think. Some kind of, yeah, something with a bit of toughness to it that's been stewing, or something with some funk. Yeah, I think because this is so clean and punchy, with a lot of, it's got some structure and something to cut through. And so giving it something to play with, something to play against, that's really got its own set of interesting flavors is a really nice way of enjoying it. But also it works as a really nice aperitif, actually. I would say this one is interesting enough on its own that just some really nice salted almonds or something, just serving it really simply before a meal works really well in that way as well. Something to sort of nibble on with it, but it doesn't need much more than that, I think. So that's kind of either extreme of my approach.
I like that. It does have some slight bitterness in there now, actually, I'm picking up, but nice and gentle and light. And you know, those kind of bitter characters are they're very good for the digestive tract, and they're good for like sort of aiding digestion, but also increasing sort of appetite. And given that I haven't had my dinner yet, I'm suddenly got very, very hungry. I think that's just absolutely gorgeous in every single way, and a real fave of mine. So again, I really like utilizing that because it showcases a completely different flavor profile, but also a different kind of presentation and potentially a different mode. Who would be, now having sort of seen and tasted that, next time when we're back in, you know, normal world and there's dinner parties are happening and such like, and you know, you always bring along a bottle of Mosel Riesling because it's great and you've got it to hand, but everyone does that. We're boring. Would you be tempted to bring something like this along to sort of act as a bit of a game changer or a little bit of a, you know, a conversational kind of thing? I think that's what these have the opportunity to do. There is also a very exclusive sort of barrel range that Ramborn have produced. Adi, have you still got, are you still doing, you've still got some of the barrel range available?
We have, but it tends to go in other ways, actually. We've got a few bottles of the previous batches going, but there's a new cider bar that's opened in Brussels called Jorin Ciderothèque, run by Jorin himself. And he's just ordered a whole barrel that he's going to tap in his bar.
A whole barrel?
First. Yeah, he's gonna take a barrel. We're still figuring out the technical possibilities of how to actually get it there and how to make sure it doesn't oxidize while it's in there and all of that stuff. But it's that should be fun. Yeah, and I think there's a whiskey club in Luxembourg that bought a barrel that they're going to bottle themselves, I think. So yeah, we have some cider aging in barrels under the farm. But yeah, if you want to find that, come to the farm because we're almost not going to find another way to get it out of there. Catherine asked if the quince drink is easily available in Luxembourg stores. So it's at Provençal, but I think the easiest way to get it is either Let's Shop or at the farm in Born. It's only about a half-hour drive from Luxembourg City, and I would highly recommend coming out to visit us. We have a coronavirus-friendly setup there if you are prepared to come out. If not, you could buy online, and you're still always welcome, completely free to go and wander in the orchards. There's a map that is available from the Huff, and you can go and walk through the orchards there. That's the easiest place to pick up the quince, or as I said, order online. Have you all used Let's Shop for anything? Yeah, so it's on there. If you go to Let's Shop and type in Ramborn, I think it's still got a really good rate for delivery because of the coronavirus thing. I think it's still free. But yeah, that's the easiest way to get hold of it, I would say. And then it comes straight from us.
In order to prepare myself for this evening meeting, I went last Saturday to Ramborn, and I had as well my first marvelous tasting inside. It was just great. And I think it was a good preparation, and perhaps after our meeting here, webinar, I'll try once again.
You've done your homework, wow.
Yes, exactly, to be prepared. It's marvelous and very friendly, and sitting outside, it was just great.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, great.
You know, it is, I mean, I've had the pleasure of going to Born a couple of times to the to the Huff, and it's this beautiful. It's just a beautiful space and a beautiful village, beautiful valley, and to be able to go and walk into the orchards and get a great view. If you've got a nice day and a bit of time, it is absolutely well worth the trip. Do go. Now, Adi, do we have one more to try?
We possibly do. I don't know if anyone ordered the box with the ice cider in it. Anyone who didn't can maybe watch along a little bit. So maybe let's keep it short on the ice cider, but just so that everyone can see it as a possibility.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to present to you is this. Look, here we go. Look, a rather elegant bottle. You might be able to see this here. Quite tall, quite elegant. This is basically a drink that is made, presented, and to be consumed very much like a dessert wine, like an ice wine. And what's happened and I'll just get Adi to confirm, the concept of this kind of drink came out of Quebec originally. It gets quite cold there apparently during the autumn winter time, and the apples were being left to freeze on the tree and then being pressed, and the liquid that came out was incredibly sugar concentrated because the majority of the water, the liquid component, was still being bound up as ice within the fruit. And so the liquid that came off was incredibly sugar concentrated, and then that is fermented, and what you get is a drink that could sit between 10, 12, 13% alcohol. In this case it is 11% alcohol, but where you still have a very high residual sweetness left over. The result is a liquid that is quite rich, it's quite viscous, it's quite unctuous, and is absolutely made to be enjoyed and consumed in small quantities, like that dessert wine, like that ice wine. And so this is a beautiful pairing with desserts, and to be sipped and to be savoured. So cheers to you all. If you haven't got the ice cider, fill your glass with your favourite, won't you? And we'll all do a wonderful toast together. So thank you all very much for participating in this. I've had a good time. Any opportunity to legitimately drink cider is always a good one, isn't it? So thank you very much. Coloration, really, really dark, honeycomb, intense. And you can see that it's got the legs running down the glass, indicating some alcohol. But more than that, it is kind of coating the glass. It is wonderfully unctuous. On the nose, gosh, it's just really strong, bold honeycomb. But it's quite sort of floral as well. A little bit of maybe some lychee in there. Absolutely magnificent. Cheers. Have a taste. So in the palate, we've got some really nice acidity, because it's not during that concentration process. It's not just the sugar that's concentrated. It's all of the properties of the apple get concentrated, and that could be the acidity as well. Or if there's some tannin in there, all of that can get concentrated. Imagine doing an ice quince 80K. Wouldn't that be a bit crazy? But obviously the apples that have been utilized here had some acidity in there, and so that's been nicely ramped up. So at first you get a real zing, but because there's so much residual sweetness in there, that acidity actually helps to cut through the sweetness, and the sweetness helps to calm that acidity. And then we also get this rather wonderful warming sensation of 11% alcohol pops up the middle too, and just rounds everything off. This is really, really rather lovely. And again, presented in such a beautiful, elegant way in this gorgeous bottle. You know, it exudes class, it exudes real quality. And it's I really like presenting the ice cider. It's a very different drink for drinking on a different occasion, but it really does show that versatility of cider and shows just how elegant it can be. Is there a question?
Well, a question, yeah. Because Luxembourg ice wine is notoriously difficult to get. How is it with these ones?
So I just shipped the last 24 to the UK. like literally today. So you've got the last of it. I think there's 3 more in the shop in Bourne.
Wow.
The next batch will be filled quite soon, but I'm not sure exactly when. But we will have more again. We've got some ready to go, ready to bottle. But yeah, our hope is that this is not notoriously difficult to get, but we're happy if it keeps selling out like it does. I mean, it's yeah, literally at the moment, the last 2 cases of it are on a pallet ready to go to an online shop for the UK.
Yeah, because the Luxembourg ice wine is basically they simply don't harvest them because they don't take the risk at the moment. And therefore it's difficult to get.
Yeah, so I guess with us, with cider, it's still accepted to kind of have the 2 different methods. So Gabe talked earlier about this cryo extraction method where you leave the apples to freeze on the tree, and ours is the juice that's frozen. So that gives us a lot more flexibility than the winemakers. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. That's yeah. And in fact, in competitions, these are usually separated into 2 kind of subcategories, which is exactly the right way that should be. But yeah, that's probably why, in terms of the availability. Yeah, if we waited until the apples freeze on the tree in Luxembourg, we would end up with not much ice cider. That's sure.
Yeah, it's lovely.
No, thank you.
Christopher's got a good question here. Should it be served chilled? That's a really good question. I have different producers say conflicting things. AD, you've got down here served 6 to 8 degrees C. So cold, if not really cold, but a little bit cooler than cellar temperature. Some say serve over ice, and I tend to drink mine more kind of room temperature because I really like the full expansive.
Yeah, I'm trying mine room temperature for the first time in a long time tonight, and it is blowing me away. It's really, really intense. At room temperature, this one is really a mouthful, and I love it. But I don't know if I could recommend for everyone to go straight in at the deep end on that. I mean, if you really wanted just something that was pure elegance and please everyone, you could drop it below 6 degrees, serve it straight out the fridge, and you would have a crowd pleaser on your hands. But even then, every degree from that will give you more and more on the nose. It will give you more and more perceived sweetness, perceived acidity. All of that perception rises with every degree of warmth that you get. And that's why you see some nerds like me will try and warm things in their hands when they're trying to taste it. And that's really because it is changing the intensity of our perception of some of those flavors. And that's not for everyone all the time. With the Perry, for example, that we were drinking earlier, that had this big mouth-filling tannin thing, velvety, leathery feeling going on. When that's served at 4 degrees on draft, I remember seeing guys watching the Champions League final at the Tube with a pint of that in each hand. And you just, like, how are they managing to drink that? That, like, I wasn't watching the football. I was watching these guys, how are they doing that? Amazing. But that's where serving temperature can have a huge impact in the way you're perceiving it. But again, there's nothing right or wrong. We've put guidelines on there to make sure that people can have it in a way that we know it works, in a way that gives all of that expression with that elegance and ease of enjoyment as well. But as I've just drunk it completely room temperature in what is now quite a warm kitchen, and it's delicious.
Bravo.
But regarding the different kinds of cider, according to your experience, what would be the temperature recommended to get the best of the taste of it? It's difficult. You don't want to take a specific decision, but what is your experience?
Yeah. Again, we can take a little bit of a steer from wine. So for those wines that are more acid driven, light, fresh driven, chilling them can help to intensify the characters, it seems, somehow, like you would do with those. You wouldn't generally leave your Gruner or your Pinot Gris to be sort of room temperature. But if you had something like the farmhouse, let's say, or those more tannic, those big, bold, earthier, maybe it'd be interesting to see what happens with the quince. I think the quince can handle also being a little warmer, actually helps all those characters to come out. And with the perry, you know, exactly what AD was saying, you've got these really big, intense characters, and if you do chill it down to 4 degrees C, I personally don't think you will get the full potential of what that fruit and what that drink can give. That doesn't make it, that if you do chill it down, doesn't make it a bad drink. It doesn't mean that any sensation is necessarily diminished. If you're enjoying it and it's performing its function on that occasion of Champions League, great, that's absolutely fine. It seems like they were having a good time. But for me, I think you want to try and find that temperature that allows the characters to come out without them necessarily being warm. Cellar temperature, let's say that's somewhere between 8 and 12 degrees for slightly bolder ciders, and maybe something more like 6 to 8, or even 4 to 6 to 8 for the lighter ones, possibly to accentuate some of those sort of fresher, fruitier kind of characters. But there are no rules. Again, it is early days, and some cider makers give directions, others don't. Very often, those people in the pubs or you at home ignored whatever the instruction is on the back, or you just automatically put it into the fridge. Again, however you think you enjoy it best, I would just really encourage you to experiment and try, and find out what kind of how you enjoy it the best. That's what's most important, I think. So
fresh, fruity, more cold, a big character like Bordeaux, then a little bit warmer, like temperature for red wine.
Yep, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah,
good idea.
Simple analogy. So, are there any final questions at all? Are you completely cidered out?
Are there any fruits that you could make cider from that aren't like plums or?
There is a drink where I come from in Gloucestershire, which is fermented plums, and it's called plum jerkum. It's called jerkum. It's quite a rare drink today. There's not so much of it made.
Have you had Mission Trails? There's one in California that makes a jerkum that's really good in the middle of nowhere.
There you go, Californian jerkum. Good name for a band, I reckon. There you go. So you can pretty much ferment anything. Yeah. Often you would have to add some water to them because they wouldn't provide enough liquid. Plums, you could probably get away with it, but you can ferment cherries and other stone fruits and things, but there wouldn't be a lot of actual liquid there. So often you would add a bit of water to it, and then maybe add a little bit of sugar in there too. And that's what, you know, we would call those things country wines in the UK, where it's fermentation of another fruit.
It's a bit like Perry, no? I mean, I guess Perry, it's a bit like Perry isn't apples, so strictly speaking.
Perry's not apples, but sits within the same family, let's say. There's this plum fruit family where you get the balance of the sugars with the amount of liquid. So you can just squeeze that fruit, and the liquid that comes from that fruit, that is sufficient. You don't need to add any water. Yeah. Lots of ciders do have water added to them, but you don't need to. So you can just squeeze that thing and make that drink from it. From a you know, a cherry or an apricot or something, it's not quite so easy. You'll be squeezing quite a lot of fruit for one glass worth, probably. So I would have thought. Any other questions at all?
Catherine's after some scrumpy.
I think you mentioned scrumpy. Is there a place for this? Well, scrumpy is an interesting one. It's kind of a pejorative term. It's generally utilized to mean a sort of traditional, rough farmhouse kind of drink that's a bit rough and ready, and you have it when you're young or when you're on holiday, and it's quite strong, and it's, you know, it's fun, but actually you don't necessarily really like it that much because it's often the cider, that term is given to a cider that is beginning or quite heavily through a process of acetification, which is a fancy word for turning into vinegar, apple cider vinegar. If you allow the air to get to your stored cider in your tank or your barrel or whatever, if you allow an air gap at the top, the air gets in, and within the air are lots of different kinds of bacteria, and a very, very common one is a Ciderobacter, and that will nibble on the alcohol and convert it into vinegar. And so if you want apple cider vinegar, then that's great. If you want a cider and it's starting to turn a bit vinegary, that is less of a pleasant experience in sort of high quantities. A tiny little bit of that process can add a little bit of spiciness and character to your cider, especially if you're making something that's a bit more sort of, you know, natural and a bit bold and robust. But I personally wouldn't seek out a scrumpy. And generally, if any brands of any scale utilize the term scrumpy as part of their positioning, it's because it's part of their portfolio, maybe where they, yeah, you know, talking about the cloudy, maybe as AD said, you can actually, there are a few cider makers that produce something called cloudy, whereby they filter it completely clean and then they add back in a clouding agent. And I got no idea what that is, but it doesn't disappear. So yeah, scrumpy isn't necessarily something to really kind of seek out. Traditional, well-made, quality, artisanal are all kind of terms that anybody can kind of use. But just, I quite like well-made cider. That generally is what does it for me. So, and if you want well-made cider, Ramborn is the place to go in Luxembourg, obviously. So, I think that pretty much brings us to, we'll do a final poll, okay? We've had, of all the ciders you've had tonight, you need to tell me, and you can only choose one. Everybody always cheats here and puts all their arms up all the time. Only one. Say which was your favorite cider, okay? Who liked cider number one, original, medium dry, the best, their favorite, that very first one, if you can remember an hour and a half ago. Thank you, Rebecca, well done. Who liked the Perry? Who thought that was their favorite drink? There we go, always a winner. Who was brave enough to enjoy the farmhouse dry cider the best? There we go. Oh yeah, there we go, we like it. Can be quite a challenging cider sometimes. Who really liked the hop cider? A lot of people like that. How, wow, look at that. Who thought that the quince was their favorite? That's me. And for those of you who had the ice cider, if you like that, there's the ice cider as well, the mix there. So you see, we've had 6 or 7 different ciders this evening, all completely different depending upon the fruit that's used, how it's been made, how it's been presented. And this is just the tip of the iceberg as well. There is an opportunity to make a multitude of different types of styles all around the world with different skills, knowledge, techniques, fruits, processes, etc. And I hope this gives you a little bit of an insight that cider isn't just one thing. It is this wonderful spectrum of different products and different profiles. And my advice to you is to get out there and, you know, go and visit the Half in Bourne and go on this journey, because you're hooked. And if you want to come over to the UK and investigate some ciders next year, give me a shout and I'll happily be your guide. Anyway, that's enough from me. Well done for bearing an hour and a half of me wittering away, talking fairish nonsense. Andrew, over to you.
Gabe, thank you very much. On behalf of the British Chamber, thank you very much. And also for AD as well. I've really enjoyed that personally. Very enjoyable. I've loved your passion as well. It's very rare we get so much passion about cider. So it's great to hear a refreshing tale about all of the different ciders. Very enjoyable. And thank you very much for taking us on that journey. I for one, have certainly enjoyed that. I've got a few empty bottles here. So hopefully I'm going to bring up my family now and enjoy that hopefully with me at the same time. Just a couple of words. This is our last webinar for the next few weeks. Our next webinar will be in October. That's the Leadership Forum, one for your diary. And we also have a Personal Tax Forum, which will be in November on the 9th. So mark that for your agenda. But that leaves me to say a big thank you once again for everyone to join us. I hope you've all very much enjoyed a brief time enjoying some cider. It's not often that we get to do a cider tasting, so I for one very much enjoyed it. Gabe, thank you very much once again. AD, really enjoyed that, and I'm going to enjoy the rest of the cider this evening. So thank you very much. If anyone wants to stay on for a couple of minutes, I think Addy said he's happy to answer any other questions.
Answer any questions, yeah, for a little while.
But if not, then enjoy the rest of the evening, enjoy your summer, and hopefully we can catch up in October or November for our next webinars. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye now.
Bye.
AD.